The universe has a funny way of making you feel like the butt of its sick cosmic joke. Take today, for example. Captain Jackson Cal leaned back in the cracked faux leather chair that passed for a captain's throne aboard the good ship Grinning Bastard. It was a name he figured fit the ship, and on days like today himself, pretty well. The Bastard was currently parked on the outskirts of a war-torn sector, a place where only the truly insane or exceptionally desperate dared to tread. Jackson was a little of both. Humanity had caught wind of a wormhole temple, a sort of alien mecca. Word was, it housed some kind of telepathic technology. The brass back on Earth drooled over it, thinking about all the strategic advantages a bit of mind reading could get them. "You know, Jax," said Lieutenant Recade, his second-in-command as she squinted at the holo display, "I've had more suicidal ideas, but not by much." "Ah, Jackson smirked. "That's what makes life interesting. Besides, when you look this good, the universe owes you a favor or two." His smile was that of a man who'd tried and failed to win the lottery one too many times, but still deluded himself into buying tickets. The temple loomed ahead, an unsettling mixture of sleek alien architecture and a migraine-inducing kaleidoscope of colors, designed by someone who clearly had lost a battle with their own sense of aesthetics. As the Bastard approached, it became apparent that the temple was not unguarded. The Zephyri were here. "Zephyri are an uptight bunch, aren't they?" Jackson snorted. He hadn't met a Zephyri he liked, or one that liked him, for that matter. They were a race of telepathic aliens who took great pleasure in reminding humans that they were lower than space dust. "If there's one thing they're good at, it's making us feel like the unwanted guests at a party," Ree replied, her fingers dancing over the control panel. "Okay, people," Jackson announced to the bridge crew. "Time to see what these tentacled party poopers are hiding." The team assembled in the cargo bay, a ragtag bunch of misfits that only a mother could love or Jackson could lead. There was Griggs, the engineer, who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts found in a dumpster. Then there was Tenya, the medical officer who had the bedside manner of a pissed-off honey badger. And of course Ree, who was probably the only sane person on the ship. "Captain, are we actually going into that thing?" Tenya asked, gesturing to the temple with a look of disbelief that was all too familiar. "Oh, don't worry, Tenya," Jackson said, clapping her on the back. "It'll be fun, like a surprise party where the surprise is you might get vaporized." Griggs snorted. "Yeah, well, I didn't sign up for getting my brain scrambled by some alien voodoo." "None of us did," Griggs re-interjected, "but here we are." The airlock clanked open, and a blast of stale, ancient air greeted them. It smelled like someone had been cooking socks in a tomb. The temple interior was no less confusing than its exterior, a maze of corridors and chambers that seemed to shift and change just to mess with them. "If anyone finds a guidebook, let me know," Jackson quipped as they moved forward, weapons at the ready. "I've seen haunted houses less creepy than this," Ree murmured, taking point. Suddenly, the corridor widened into a massive chamber, dominated by an altar that glittered ominously in the dim light. The Zephyri were there, all right, their slimy, tentacled forms glowing faintly in their ceremonial robes. They regarded the human intruders with the kind of disdain reserved for particularly persistent mosquitoes. Jackson cleared his throat. "Hello, fellows. We're here to take a look at your lovely temple." The Zephyri telepathic voice reverberated in their heads, a cold, echoing whisper that made Jackson feel like he'd just swallowed a bucket of ice. "Humans are not welcome here. This sacred place is not for your kind." "Well, that's just rude," Jackson replied, mentally as much as aloud. "Here I thought hospitality was universal." "Your minds are crude, unrefined," the Zephyri responded, their telepathy dripping with condescension. Griggs couldn't help himself. "Join the club, tentacle face." Ree shot him a look. "That's not helping, Griggs." The atmosphere was tense like the seconds before a bar fight. Jackson could feel the palpable hostility, but he also noticed something else, a sort of hum beneath the surface, invisible strings pulling at his conscious mind. "All right," Jackson said, trying for diplomacy. "We're not here to fight. Just want to understand what you've got here. We're not looking to offend anyone's religious sensibilities." The Zephyri's response was a barely perceptible increase in the hum, like a vast machine awakening. "Your presence here is an affront. Leave." Jackson could see this was going nowhere fast. "Okay, then. Let's just take a peek around, shall we?" Ree nodded, signaling the team to fan out. Jackson felt the Zephyri's mental pressure increase, a poking, prodding sensation that made him want to itch his brain. "This is great," Tenya muttered under her breath. "Nothing like a little psychic violation to spice up the day." "Think of it as a very invasive therapy session," Jackson replied, trying to lighten the mood. As they explored, Jackson realized the temple was not just a place of worship but a psychic amplifier. The Zephyri had been using it to project their influence across the sector. That kind of power in the wrong hands, or tentacles, could spell disaster. "We need to figure out how this thing works," Griggs said, peering at the alien symbols lining the walls. "No kidding," Ree added. "I'd rather not have my thoughts broadcast for the universe to hear." The Zephyri were growing restless, their mental voices a cacophony of irritation. Jackson felt the pressure on his skull intensify, like someone was trying to crack open a nut. His nut. "We should retreat," Ree suggested, her voice cutting through the rising tide of mental noise. But Jackson wasn't ready to give up yet. "We need something to bring back, something to show these pencil pushers we didn't just run around being yelled at by telepathic squid." Tenya, meanwhile, was examining a smaller altar, her eyes narrowing as she scanned its surface. "Captain, this might be it." Jackson joined her, looking over the alien symbols that seemed to vibrate with latent energy. "What are we looking at?" "This is a control interface," Tenya explained, "or something like it. If we can figure this out, we might be able to shut down their broadcasting system." "And if we can't?" Griggs asked. Tenya shrugged. "We'll probably end up with our brains scrambled like eggs, but what's life without a little risk?" Jackson grinned. "That's the spirit." "All right, let's see what we can do." The Zephyri, sensing their intentions, began to advance, their mental attacks now a relentless barrage. Jackson could feel his crew's resolve beginning to buckle under the strain. "Captain," Ree's voice was strained, "we need to move. Now." "Not yet," Jackson said, his hands moving over the altar's controls, guided by equal parts desperation and intuition. Griggs was working at the opposite end, muttering to himself, "If I had a credit for every time I've had to pull a miracle out of my ass." The Zephyri were almost upon them, their forms shifting like shadows in a nightmare. The hum was now a roar, threatening to drown out all rational thought. And then, suddenly, there was a click, a hum, and the feeling of a great weight lifting. The altar glowed briefly and the Zephyri staggered, their mental focus shattered. "Ha!" Jackson yelled. "Take that, you telepathic bastards." The team didn't need further encouragement. They bolted, racing back through the corridors as the temple began to destabilize, the walls shaking as if in protest. The bastards' engines roared to life as they made their escape, leaving the temple and its disgruntled guardians behind. "Well," Griggs said, panting as they settled back onto the bridge, "that was a lovely little jaunt." "I don't know about you," Jackson said, his grin wolfish, "but I've had worse tours." Ree shook her head. "Just another day in paradise, right?" "Exactly," Jackson replied, looking out at the stars, the thrill of survival coursing through him. "Think they'll be back for revenge?" Tenya asked, still catching her breath. "Oh, probably," Jackson admitted. "But hey, if they want a rematch, they know where to find us." He leaned back in his chair, feeling absurdly content. It wasn't every day you lived to see the next one, and if that wasn't something to laugh about, he didn't know what was. "Well, that was a kick in the cosmic balls," Jackson muttered, slumped in the captain's chair of the grinning bastard. The holo display flickered as if it too had a migraine from the temple's psychic onslaught. Ree stood at the helm, arms crossed and face set in a permanent scowl, her default setting. A little more warning about the brain probing would have been nice. "Hey," Jackson shrugged, "I didn't exactly get a memo from the tentacle overlords." Next time, let's just stick to poking things with sticks, Griggs grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. Less brain damage, Tenya snorted, says the man who thinks rocket fuel is a suitable aftershave. Griggs opened his mouth for a retort when a commotion echoed from the back of the bridge. Lyra, the newest addition to their merry band of misfits and a human with a knack for getting into trouble, stumbled forward, eyes wide as saucers. "Lyra, what's got you looking like you just saw a ghost?" Jackson asked, only half joking. Given their luck, it wouldn't surprise him if the temple had ghosts too. I saw something," Lyra said, voice trembling. "Visions, Zephyr rituals, they were, fighting with their minds like some kind of telepathic war." Jackson's eyebrows shot up. "Telepathic war? You mean like mental kung fu?" "More like mental nukes," Lyra replied, her voice barely a whisper. They were. They were demolishing entire fleets without lifting a finger. "Great," Ree sighed, "as if our day wasn't going splendidly enough." "How's that possible?" Tenya asked, leaning against the bulkhead. "I mean, I knew they were smug but obliterating spaceships with thoughts." "It's the temple," Lyra continued, rubbing her temples as if trying to stave off a headache. "It amplifies their abilities, makes them unbeatable." Silence fell over the bridge like an awkward relative at a family dinner. Jackson didn't like silence. It usually meant someone was about to die, or worse, that someone was about to suggest a plan. "So we're outmatched," Jackson said finally. "Not exactly news, but what do we do about it?" "Run," Griggs suggested hopefully. "Hide," Tenya added. "Pray," Ree said, though Jackson suspected she was only half kidding. "No," Jackson said, a grin spreading across his face. "We adapt. If that temple can amplify telepathic abilities, why not ours?" "Because we don't have any," Griggs interjected, yet again proving he was a master of stating the obvious. "But Lyra does," Jackson pointed out. "And if she can tap into that power, you want me to fight them?" Lyra asked, incredulous. "With my mind. Think of it less as fighting and more as borrowing their playbook," Jackson said. "All we need is a way to turn their own weapon against them." "Turning their weapon against them is all well and good," Ree said, her skepticism palpable. "But what's Plan B when that inevitably fails?" "Plan B is the same as Plan A," Jackson replied with a wink. "Don't die. You sure you're not just making this up as you go along?" Griggs asked. "Absolutely," Jackson said, standing up. "But isn't that what makes it fun?" The crew collectively groaned. Fun was, after all, a relative term on the grinning bastard. As they barreled through the war-torn sector, Lyra sat cross-legged in the middle of the cargo bay, trying to make sense of the chaos in her head. The others buzzed around her like nervous bees, each pretending they had something vitally important to do. "Just clear your mind," Tenya suggested, though she sounded more like she was guessing. "Like meditation, but with more stakes." "Clear my mind," Lyra said, eyes screwed shut. "Have you met my mind? It's never been clear." "Then think of it as mental spring cleaning," Ree offered. "Out with the old, in with the alien mind powers." "Right," Lyra said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "No pressure." As Lyra concentrated, the hum from the temple began to resonate through her like static on an ancient radio. Visions flickered behind her eyelids, Zephyr conducting rituals, their mental energies swirling like a storm. "Anything?" Jackson asked, leaning against a bulkhead, arms crossed. "A headache," Lyra replied, eyes still closed. "And not the fun kind. Just keep at it," Jackson said, trying to sound encouraging, though he knew it came off as dismissive. "You're doing great." In truth, Jackson was worried. If Lyra didn't figure this out, they'd be sitting ducks for the next Zephyr mind blitz. And Jackson wasn't one for sitting or ducks. The ship's comms crackled to life, interrupting his thoughts. "Captain," came Ree's voice, "we've got company." "Zephyr ships closing in fast." "Of course we do," Jackson muttered, racing back to the bridge. "Because why wouldn't they want to kill us today?" The view from the bridge was less than reassuring. Sleek, predatory Zephyr vessels were descending on them with all the enthusiasm of a tax collector on payday. "Shields?" Jackson asked, though he already knew the answer. "Minimal," Griggs replied, fingers flying over the controls. "Like a wet paper towel." "Great," Jackson said. We'll have to be more charming than usual. That's a low bar, Ree muttered, toggling switches on the control panel. The Zephyr ships opened fire, their weapons eerily silent but devastatingly effective. The grinning bastard shuddered violently, alarms blaring like a chorus of doom. In the cargo bay, Lyra was struggling. The visions were coming faster now, images of destruction and chaos, the Zephyr's psychic warfare laid bare. It was like trying to read a book while being punched in the face. "Any time now, Lyra," Tenya called, bracing herself against a wall as the ship lurched. "I'm trying," Lyra snapped, frustration and fear warring in her voice. "It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. Then drink faster," Jackson urged over the comms, sounding more desperate than he intended. Another hit jarred the ship, and Ree cursed under her breath. "Shields down to nothing. We're out of options." "In that case," Jackson said, a grim smile tugging at his lips, "let's make them think twice about picking on us." "How?" Griggs asked, panic creeping into his usually sarcastic tone. "By showing them they're not the only ones with mind tricks," Jackson replied, praying that Lyra was as desperate as he was. In the cargo bay, Lyra took a deep breath, focusing all her energy on the Zephyr ships. She reached out with her mind, feeling the temple's power surge through her, amplifying her thoughts. At first, nothing. Then slowly she felt a connection, a link between her and the Zephyr, tenuous but unmistakable. She pushed harder, imagining herself as a part of their hive mind. And then, without warning, the Zephyr ships hesitated, their attack faltering as if suddenly unsure. "Did you do that?" Tenya asked, eyes wide. Lyra nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. "I think so. I showed them what we saw, their own rituals, their own destruction." "Then keep showing them," Jackson said, hope blossoming in his chest. "Make them see that we're not just some pesky humans. Make them see that we're the nightmare under their beds." Lyra focused again, pushing more memories into the Zephyr consciousness, images of human defiance, of survival against all odds. The Zephyr ships seemed to waver, their telepathic assault losing coherence. On the bridge, Jackson watched in disbelief as the Zephyr ships pulled back, their formation breaking. It was working. Against all logic and reason, it was working. "Looks like they're retreating," Ree said, equal parts disbelief and relief. "For now," Jackson cautioned, though he couldn't stop grinning. "But we've bought ourselves some time." "Time for what?" Griggs asked, still white-knuckled at the controls. "To figure out how to turn this mess into our advantage," Jackson replied. "If Lyra can tap into their power, then maybe we've got a shot. Or maybe they'll come back with more ships," Ree pointed out. "Always the optimist," Jackson said, clapping her on the shoulder. "But for now, let's enjoy the fact that we're not dead." The crew shared a tense, uncertain laugh. In the vast, uncaring universe, it was the little victories that counted. And this was as little as they got, Jackson thought, but still a victory. "Captain," Lyra's voice came over the comms, weary but triumphant, "I think I can learn to control it. With time." Jackson's grin widened. "Good," he said, "because I have a feeling we're going to need every trick in the book." As the grinning bastard limped away from the temple, Jackson couldn't help but chuckle. The universe might be a cruel, unforgiving place, but even it had to respect a crew crazy enough to fight back with nothing but guts and borrowed power. And if the cosmos wanted more of them, Jackson mused as he settled back into his chair, well, it knew where to find them. The grinning bastard limped away from the temple like an old drunk staggering out of a bar fight, victorious but barely standing. Inside, the crew wasn't much different, grinning through the bruises, metaphorically speaking. A bit of victory with a side of existential dread, just how they liked it. "Looks like we're still in one piece," Jackson declared, leaning back in his captain's chair. The chair creaked ominously, which seemed about right for their current state. "Define one piece," Ree retorted, eyeing a flickering console. "Nothing here works properly, including us." "I don't know, I think Griggs here is working just fine," Jackson said, nodding at the man who was currently dabbing something suspiciously flammable smelling on his neck. "It's called cologne," Griggs replied, affronted, "and it doubles as a weapon in case of emergencies." "Why am I not surprised?" Tenya snorted, rolling her eyes. It was her default expression, like her face was permanently set to skepticism. Yeah, sure, Lyra chimed in, sounding more tired than triumphant. Let's just hope we don't have to rely on your bodily aroma to survive. Speaking of survival, Jackson said, steering the conversation back to slightly more important topics than Grig's hygiene, we need to figure out what to do about that temple. We can't keep running from every Zephyri with a mind bomb. Or a death wish, Ree added, glancing at the comms. They'll be back, they always are. Like cockroaches, Tenya agreed, except they have telepathic nukes. Which brings us to the crux of our little existential crisis, Jackson said, nodding at Lyra. You said you could learn to control it. How? Lyra hesitated, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Well, I've been thinking. Oh, Griggs muttered. Last time someone said that we ended up in this mess. Lyra ignored him. The Zephyri rituals, those mind battles, they use them to sharpen their abilities. What if we try something similar? Let me get this straight, Ree said, folding her arms. You want us to play mind games with aliens who can make our brains into mashed potatoes. More like mental training, Lyra corrected, though she didn't sound too convinced herself. If we can adapt their practices, we might stand a chance. Or end up as lab rats in their next telepathic experiment, Griggs pointed out, ever the optimist. Jackson? Lyra asked, looking to him for leadership or at least a semi-coherent plan. Jackson rubbed his chin, thinking. Adapting alien religious practices was about as appealing as adopting a pet asteroid, but desperate times called for desperate idiocy. I don't know, he said. Last thing we need is to piss off the Zephyri more than we already have. Are you suggesting we do nothing? Tenya asked, incredulous. That doesn't sound like your style. My style is mostly not dying, Jackson replied, and I'm pretty attached to it. But if we can learn from them, maybe we can level the playing field, Lyra insisted. Yeah, Ree said dryly, and if my aunt had whiskers, she'd be a cat. She really wouldn't, Tenya muttered, earning a smirk from Ree. Jackson sighed, knowing full well that inaction wasn't really an option, not with the Zephyri out for blood. All right, let's say we go along with this suicidal plan of yours, Lyra. How do you propose we start? Lyra fidgeted, clearly not thrilled about leading this particular charge. I need more exposure to the temple's energy. It's where they draw their power from. Maybe I can learn to. I don't know. Borrow it. Borrow? Jackson echoed. You mean without the usual late fees and migraines? Something like that, Lyra said, shrugging. So we're going back into the war zone, Ree concluded, her tone as flat as the ship's hull after their last encounter. Brilliant. I can't wait. You're always such a ray of sunshine, Jackson remarked, drumming his fingers on his chair. But she's right. If we want to have any chance at all, we've got to dive back in. Back to the temple where the psychic party's at, Griggs grumbled. I hope they have snacks this time. Snacks for the mind, Tenya quipped. Like a buffet of unsettling visions and existential dread. Can't wait, Jackson said with faux enthusiasm. Plot a course then. Let's go say hello to our new frenemies. With a collective groan, the crew set about preparing for their next foolhardy venture. The grinning bastard wasn't built for stealth or speed, but what it lacked in finesse it made up for in audacity. And a thick layer of grime that seemed to deter even the most stubborn of attacks. As they neared the temple, the ship's holo display once again threw a fit, flickering with the kind of enthusiasm you'd expect from a machine contemplating its own inevitable obsolescence. Here we go again, Ree muttered, running diagnostics that would probably lie to her anyway. Just remember, Jackson said to Lyra as they approached the temple's psychic field, you're only borrowing. Think of it like a library, only without any annoying librarians. You've never met my librarian, Tenya interjected. She'd fit right in with the Zephyri. Good to know, Jackson said, not really listening. All right, Lyra, the floor, or rather the insanity, is yours. Lyra settled down, focusing her mind once more. This time she was prepared, or as prepared as anyone could be when facing the equivalent of an interstellar haunted house. The psychic hum enveloped her, wrapping around her like a too-tight blanket. Anything? Jackson asked, voice cautious. Less than before, Lyra admitted, face scrunched in concentration. But it's there. Like a whisper at a crowded party, which we're not invited to, Griggs added because sarcasm was free and they were on a budget. Try to amplify it, Jackson suggested. But gently. We're aiming for enlightenment, not implosion. Lyra nodded, though her face suggested she wasn't entirely sure about the difference. She reached out with her mind, feeling the temple's energy flow through her like a sluggish stream, full of debris and barely navigable. Anything? Tenya asked, leaning against the bulkhead. Images, Lyra said, eyes shut tight. Rituals, mind battles, they're intense. Well, no kidding, Griggs said, crossing his arms. Who knew that might be the understatement of the century? Can you make sense of it? Ree asked, her skepticism softening slightly. Sort of, Lyra replied, struggling to piece together the fragmented visions. It's like a dance, complex patterns. They're using their emotions as fuel. Ah, emotional warfare, Jackson mused. My favorite kind. Can't we just send them a mixtape of breakup songs and call it a day? Griggs suggested. Unfortunately, they might take that as an act of war, Tenya replied, deadpan. Lyra opened her eyes, looking more haunted than hopeful. I think I can mimic some of it, but it's going to take time, practice. And maybe a lot of aspirin. You heard her, Jackson said to the crew. We're going to need to practice, meaning we're going to be here a while. You mean we're going to be targets a while, Ree corrected. Yeah, but if we pull this off, targets with a fighting chance, Jackson shot back, trying to maintain morale. Or a really good last stand, Griggs offered, ever the realist. As they settled into the grim reality of their plan, the crew of the Grinning Bastard prepared themselves for the next round. They may have been woefully outmatched, but they were scrappy. And scrappy was sometimes enough, especially when the alternative was a swift telepathic demise. All right, Jackson said, let's get to it. We've got a lot of work to do and only a few lives to live. The crew grumbled in agreement, returning to their stations with the kind of resignation that came with living aboard the Grinning Bastard. If they were going to make history, or at least avoid becoming it, they'd have to adapt faster than a Zephyr could think them into oblivion. As Jackson glanced out at the stars, he couldn't help but chuckle darkly. The universe had a way of throwing curveballs, and they just decided to catch one with their teeth. Here's hoping they had some dental insurance. Jackson Cal sat in the flickering light of the Grinning Bastard's bridge, feeling like the universe's designated punchline. The crew was no better off, scattered around him like a band of misfit toys that even the factory seconds bin didn't want. They were all facing the same grim reality, adapting to alien practices or having their brains turned into scrambled eggs by the Zephyr. All right, Jackson declared, trying to muster some enthusiasm for what felt like a slow march to doom. Time to start this party. If by party you mean a telepathic suicide pact, remused, then yeah, we're all set. Tenya, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes so hard Jackson was half worried they'd get stuck that way. Great. Just what I always wanted, telepathic yoga. Namaste and all that. Lyra, caught in the spotlight of necessity, stepped forward with all the confidence of a cornered animal. Listen, it's not as bad as it sounds. We adapt their rituals, strengthen our mental defenses. Simple, simple, Griggs echoed as if testing the word's absurdity. You mean like how spaceships are simple, simpler than your cologne, Ree shot back, which drew a rare smirk from Tenya. Jackson rubbed his temples. All right, all right. Let's get down to it before we all spontaneously combust from the sarcasm. Lyra closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind as if testing the water's temperature before a dive. The temple's psychic energy was like a hurricane of whispers and emotions, and she had to balance on its edge without getting swept away. Visualize the mind battles, Lyra instructed, her voice strained but steady. Focus on your emotions as fuel. Control them. Weaponize them. Great, Griggs muttered, settling into a chair that protested under his weight. Just what I needed. Encouragement to feel more. Think of it as emotional bodybuilding, Tenya quipped, her tone a blend of skepticism and resignation. "Yeah," Ree added, "except instead of muscles, you get a migraine that can bench press a solar system." They settled into an uneasy silence, each crew member focusing inward, trying to tap into the alien dance that was less Swan Lake and more psychic mosh pit. The ship's holo display flickered like it was having a personal crisis of its own, reflecting the crew's collective doubt. As minutes stretched into an eternity, Lyra's voice floated through the bridge, soft and tentative. "I can feel it, it's like a spider web, delicate but strong." "Well, let's hope it's Spider-Man strong," Jackson replied, "because we're going to need all the help we can get." Suddenly, the ship shuddered, a deep groan reverberating through the hull. Jackson's hands flew to the armrests. "Report," he barked, trying to sound more in control than he felt. Ree's fingers danced over the console, which responded with all the enthusiasm of a sulking teenager. "Incoming transmission," she said. "From the Zephyr, of course," Jackson sighed. "Because why not?" The holo display flickered again, this time solidifying into the image of a Zephyr priest. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling light, as if it had just stumbled across a particularly juicy piece of gossip. "Human vessel," the Zephyr intoned, "you trespass on sacred ground. Cease your blasphemous activities or face consequences." Jackson leaned forward, rubbing his chin in thought. "Blasphemous activities," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling survival these days? You defile the temple with your crude imitations," the Zephyr continued, its tone dripping with disdain. "Hey," Tenya quipped, "we might be crude, but at least we're not boring." Griggs snorted. "Yeah, and you can't blame us for wanting to crash the psychic party." The Zephyr's eyes narrowed, its expression shifting into something that made Jackson's skin crawl. "You have been warned," it said before the transmission cut off, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. "Well," Jackson said after a beat that went about as well as expected, "which is to say, terribly," Ree added, staring at the darkened screen. Lyra squared her shoulders, determination hardening her features. "We can't back down now. If they're this riled up, we must be doing something right. Or something incredibly wrong," Griggs countered, scratching his neck as if contemplating the flammability of their situation. "Either way," Jackson interjected, "we need to keep pushing. If we stop, they'll just pick us off when we're weakest." "Yeah," Tenya chimed in, "like vultures waiting for a fresh carcass." "Lovely imagery," Jackson muttered. "All right, let's regroup. Keep practicing. We need to be ready for whatever those telepathic maniacs throw at us." As the crew dispersed to their respective stations, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were in way over their heads. The Zephyr didn't just hold the high ground, they held every conceivable advantage. All Jackson and his crew had was desperation and a penchant for gallows humor. Hours slipped by, their repetitive training only punctuated by the ship's usual creaks and groans. The grinning bastard wasn't pleased about being so close to the temple again. Not that Jackson could blame it. If he had a choice, he'd be halfway across the galaxy, sipping something strong and preferably intoxicating. "Okay," Lyra announced, interrupting Jackson's daydream of early retirement. "I think I've got a handle on the basics. I can amplify our mental defenses, maybe even push back if we're attacked." "Good," Jackson replied, feeling a flicker of hope. "Because something tells me we're going to need it sooner rather than later." His words proved prophetic. Not 5 minutes later, the ship's alarm blared, a discordant wail that sent everyone's nerves into overdrive. "What now?" Jackson demanded, turning to Ree, who was furiously punching buttons as if they'd personally offended her. "We've got company," she said, her voice tight. "A Zephyr ship. And they're not here for a friendly chat. Guess they finally decided to RSVP," Tenya remarked, her usual sarcasm laced with an edge of anxiety. Jackson's mind raced, spinning through potential tactics with all the grace of a drunkard trying to dance. "Lyra, you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Lyra replied, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Her eyes closed and a focused calm settled over her like a well-worn cloak. "All right," Jackson said, turning to the rest of the crew. Let's see if this psychic self-defense class pays off. The Zephyr ship loomed in the void, an ominous silhouette against the scattered starlight. Jackson could almost feel its crew's collective disdain, like an oppressive weight pressing down on them. "Brace yourselves," he ordered, gripping the armrests of his chair as if his life depended on it, which, considering the circumstances, it probably did. Lyra's brow furrowed in concentration, her mind reaching out to weave the mental defenses she'd pieced together from the temple's secrets. The rest of the crew followed suit, focusing their thoughts and emotions, strengthening their resolve. It was a makeshift shield, a patchwork of stolen knowledge and raw determination. The Zephyr attack hit like a tidal wave, crashing against their defenses with a force that made the ship's walls groan in protest. Jackson's vision blurred, and for a moment he was sure they were done for. But their defenses held, the crew's combined efforts forming a barrier just strong enough to take the brunt of the assault. The mental pressure was intense, like trying to hold a door shut against a howling wind. "Push back," Lyra urged, her voice strained from the effort. "We can't just sit here and take it." Jackson gritted his teeth, focusing every ounce of his willpower on countering the attack. The crew followed suit, their mental defenses surging forward like an invisible shield wall. For a brief moment, Jackson felt a flicker of connection, an echo of the temple's energy resonating with their combined efforts. It was raw power, barely controlled, but it gave them the edge they needed to turn the tide. The Zephyr attack faltered, their telepathic onslaught wavering as the crew's defenses held firm. Rhea let out a triumphant whoop, her eyes blazing with a mix of relief and determination. "We did it," she exclaimed, the tension in her voice finally giving way to something like hope. "Don't celebrate yet," Jackson cautioned, though he couldn't keep the grin off his face. "We're still in the deep end and these waters are full of sharks." "Well, at least we didn't get eaten," Griggs chimed in, a rare note of optimism in his voice. Yet, Tenya added, ever the realist. "Give them time." The Zephyr ship lingered, its presence a constant reminder of the threat they faced. But for now, Jackson and his crew had held their own against the odds. They'd survived the first round, and for a moment, the universe's punchline didn't seem so bleak. As they regrouped, the crew took stock of their situation, adrenaline still coursing through their veins like a potent drug. They'd faced down a Zephyr assault and come out the other side, not unscathed but certainly not defeated. "All right, team," Jackson said, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "Let's keep this up. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least we've got the map, and maybe a compass," Rhea added, her tone lightening as the immediate threat receded. Lyra, visibly exhausted but resolute, nodded. "We can do this. We just need to keep pushing, keep adapting. We'll get through this, yeah," Tenya said with a wry smile, "and maybe we'll even get a t-shirt at the end." "I survived the Zephyr brain assault and all I got was this lousy t-shirt," Griggs chuckled. "Hey, I'd wear it. Beats wearing nothing but hope and desperation." "All right, enough chit-chat," Jackson said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get back to it. We're on borrowed time, and I'd rather not find out what happens when the library wants its books back." As the crew returned to their training, Jackson watched them with a sense of pride mingled with trepidation. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch, and together they might just have a fighting chance. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jackson allowed himself a small, genuine smile. The universe might have cast them as the underdogs, but they were far from beaten. The only thing more dangerous than a cornered crew with nothing left to lose was one that had discovered its own potential. And if the Zephyr wanted a fight, then by all means, they'd give them one. The Zephyr ship hung in space like a bad omen, its telepathic might a ticking psychic bomb. Jackson Cal sat on the bridge of the grinning bastard, watching the flickering holo-display with the same grim determination he reserved for tax audits and ex-girlfriend encounters. "Brace for another round," he said, voice as steady as a gambler on a losing streak. "Lyra, how's it holding up?" Lyra's brow was slick with sweat, her eyes closed, fingers twitching like she was trying to strangle an invisible foe. "About as well as a paper umbrella in a hurricane," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Great," Jackson replied dryly. "I love hurricanes." Ree shot him a glare that could melt steel. "You know, if sarcasm was currency, we'd be rich enough to buy our way out of this mess." "Best I can do," Jackson shrugged. "You asked for leadership, I give you gallows humor." Lyra let out a strained breath, trying to keep their mental defenses from crumbling like a sandcastle facing high tide. "I might have a plan," she said, her voice strained like a violin string about to snap. Jackson perked up. "Oh, do share with the class." "Amplify emotions," Lyra explained, straining to keep her focus. "We use them as a weapon. Push back with every ounce of frustration, sarcasm, and cynicism we've got. Overload their senses." "Brilliant," Tenya said, her usual sarcasm tempered by genuine approval. "If cynicism's what we need, we're armed to the teeth." Griggs let out a low chuckle. "This could be our crowning achievement. Death by snark." The ship shuddered, protesting against the Zephyrs' renewed assault. Jackson's grip tightened on the armrests, his knuckles white. "Right," he barked, snapping everyone to attention. "Every negative thought, every insult you've ever wanted to hurl, now's the time. Let's give them the emotional equivalent of a bad day at the office." The crew focused, minds buzzing with frustration, determination, and a hefty dose of gallows humor. They pushed back, emotions weaponized like a psychological hand grenade. For a moment it seemed to work. The pressure eased, the ship's groans subsiding to a dull murmur. Victory seemed within reach, the Zephyrs' attack faltering under the weight of their combined cynicism. But then, as if the universe decided to twist the knife, everything went to hell. The temple's energy surged, amplifying not just their defenses but their confusion and fear. Lyra's grasp slipped, and the mental shield shattered like a pane of glass hit by a sledgehammer. The crew staggered, clutching at consoles and railings as the psychic feedback hit them like a freight train. Chaos erupted, fractured thoughts and emotions ricocheting off one another. Jackson reeled, trying to hold the crew together with the sort of leadership that was more duct tape than glue. "Stay with me," he shouted, though his voice felt like it was being dragged through molasses. Lyra's eyes flew open, wide with panic. "I can't," she began, her voice cracking under the strain. "Focus, Lyra," Jackson yelled, desperation clawing at his insides. "We need you," but Lyra was slipping, her abilities stretched too thin, breaking under the weight of the temple's amplified energy. The ship trembled, systems flickering, crew clinging to consciousness like a lifeline. "Captain?" Ree called, her voice barely cutting through the chaos. "We can't take much more of this." "No kidding," Jackson replied, struggling to maintain his composure. "Anyone got a bright idea?" Before we all turned to psychic mush, Tenya, usually quick with a sarcastic retort, was silent, eyes closed as she fought to keep her mind from shattering under the pressure. Griggs was no better, his usual smirk replaced by a grimace of concentration. "Jackson," Lyra gasped, fighting to regain control. I can't." Jackson's heart sank. They were out of options, out of time. The Zephyri were relentless, their telepathic assault a force of nature, and here they were, a ragtag crew on a limping ship, holding on by sheer stubbornness. He glanced around, taking in the determined faces of his crew, his family. They'd come so far, defied the odds, and now, at the brink of defeat, they stood united. "We're not beaten yet," Jackson said, though his own voice sounded hollow in his ears. "We fight, we survive." "It's what we do." "Yeah," Griggs murmured, teeth gritted. "Until we don't." The holo display flickered, the Zephyri priest's image shimmering back into view. Its eyes glowed with that unnerving light, like it had just found another layer of human weakness to exploit. "Humans," it intoned, voice oozing with contempt. "Your resistance is futile. Surrender and accept your fate." Jackson straightened, adopting the demeanor of a man who stared down fate and laughed in its face. "Futile?" he echoed. "Buddy, you've never met a more stubborn bunch of bastards." The priest's eyes narrowed, its disdain palpable even through the transmission. "Your defiance is meaningless. You will fail." "Maybe," Jackson conceded, offering a lopsided grin. But if we're going down, we're taking you with us. The priest's image vanished, the transmission cutting off with an air of finality. The Zephyri assault intensified, like a storm redoubling its fury at the prospect of losing. Jackson turned to his crew, a fierce determination, tempered by irony, settling over him. "All right, we might be running on fumes and bad ideas, but we're not done yet." Ree nodded, her expression fierce despite the pounding in her head. "Let's give them hell." The crew rallied, drawing on reserves they didn't know they had, minds sinking in a desperate last-ditch effort to hold the line. Emotions flared, a chaotic, beautiful mess of anger, fear, and defiance. Jackson felt it, the pulse of their combined will, a fragile but powerful force that burned against the darkness threatening to consume them. But it wasn't enough. Not against the Zephyri, not against the temple's amplified power. The ship groaned, systems straining, the crew's minds fraying at the edges. Jackson's heart sank, reality crashing down with the weight of inevitability. They were losing. Yet even as hope dimmed, Jackson's resolve hardened. If they were going down, they'd go down fighting, their defiance a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "Keep pushing," he urged, voice raw with determination. "We're not finished." The bridge trembled, the ship an extension of their desperation. Lyra's eyes blazed with renewed focus, channeling every ounce of mental strength she had left. And then, as if the universe decided it had toyed with them enough, something shifted. A flicker of resistance, a crack in the Zephyri's assault, small but there. Jackson's heart leapt, hope sparking amidst despair. "There, hit it," the crew responded, minds converging on the weakness with all the precision of a scalpel. It was a long shot, a gamble with everything on the line. The Zephyri's assault wavered, the priest's overconfidence exposed as their vulnerability. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The pressure eased, the ship's groans subsiding, the crew's minds holding against the odds. They'd done it, not defeated the Zephyri, but survived another round. Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relief mingling with exhaustion. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for now they'd bought themselves a reprieve. "Well," Tenya gasped, letting out a shaky laugh, "that was fun. Let's never do it again." Griggs chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'll drink to that." As the crew regrouped, Jackson watched them with a mix of pride and weariness. They'd faced the abyss and come back, not unscathed but unbroken. They were battered, bruised, and clinging to survival with every ounce of stubbornness and wit they had. But for now, that was enough. Ree met Jackson's gaze, a tired but determined smile on her lips. "We're still here." Yet Jackson replied, his own smile tinged with irony. Who'd have thought Lyra, still visibly drained but resolute, nodded. "We'll keep fighting. We can do this." Jackson nodded, eyes sweeping over his crew. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch. And together, they'd face whatever the universe threw their way. The Zephyri might have every advantage, but they had something just as powerful: grit, determination, and a refusal to back down. And if the universe wanted to cast them as the punchline, then by all means, they'd make it a damn memorable one. Jackson wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and glared at the flickering console. The grinning bastard was living up to its name, mocking him with every shudder and creak. This ship had more issues than a tabloid scandal, and he was starting to feel like the beleaguered celebrity caught in the middle. "Anyone else feel like we're trying to fly a cardboard box through a thunderstorm?" Jackson quipped, his voice laced with exasperation. Ree shot him a look that was a mix of exhaustion and dry amusement. "If we crash, at least we'll finally have some peace and quiet." "True," Jackson said with a wry grin. "Our eternal rest will be the first vacation I've had in years." Lyra, her face pale but determined, was hunched over a battered console, fingers dancing over the keys like they were competing in a speed-typing contest. Her eyes were alight with something new, hope mixed with desperation. A potent cocktail, sure, but better than the straight shot of doom they'd been sipping. "I found something," she said, voice tinged with the excitement of someone who just stumbled upon a hidden stash of chocolate in a diet camp. Jackson turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "Is it a winning lottery ticket? because we could really use one of those. Better, Lyra replied, ignoring the sarcasm. It's an artifact from the temple, something that could amplify our telepathy. The rest of the crew perked up at her words. Even Griggs, who'd been slumped over his console like it was the last call at a bar, straightened with interest. Amplify, huh? Tenya said, flashing a grin. Does that mean we can finally give the Zephyri a headache for a change? Rhys snorted. I hope you mean a migraine. If we're aiming for anything less, we might as well go home. Home? Jackson scoffed. Only thing waiting for us there is a pile of junk mail and an empty fridge. Jackson leaned in closer, studying the readouts with a mix of skepticism and that flicker of hope he'd almost forgotten how to feel. All right, Lyra, what's the catch? Does it turn us into mindless zombies or just blow our brains out? Lyra shook her head. Neither, apparently. It's designed to work with human emotions, amplify them into a telepathic force. If we can sync it with our mental defenses, we might just stand a chance against the Zephyri. Jackson could almost feel the weight of the universe lifting, if only a tiny bit. Like being handed an umbrella in a storm, not much, but better than nothing. So, how do we use it without melting our brains? Simple, Lyra replied. We channel our emotions through it, boost the signal, and hope it's enough to knock the Zephyri off their high horse. Griggs let out a low laugh. So, basically, we're weaponizing our bad attitudes. I always knew my cynicism would come in handy. Finally, a use for all those years of being told to cheer up, Tenya added, rolling her eyes. Jackson felt a swell of pride despite their dire situation. Sure, they were a ragtag crew on a ship held together by wishful thinking and duct tape, but they were his crew, and with a possible solution in their grasp, they were more than ready to take on whatever the cosmos had in store. All right, team, he said, voice firm. We're going to give this everything we've got. If cynicism and sarcasm are our weapons, then let's see if we can't go down in history as humanity's most sarcastic saviors. The crew nodded, determination hardening their features. It was time to put their plan into action, time to show the Zephyri that humans were more than just a punchline in the universe's joke book. With Lyra's guidance, they began to adjust the ship systems to activate the artifact. It wasn't easy, nothing involving alien tech ever was, but they worked together, each member of the crew contributing their unique skills to bring the plan to life. Anyone else feel like we're trying to defuse a bomb with a spatula? Griggs muttered, fingers flying over the console. More like cooking a souffle with a sledgehammer, Tenya replied, not looking up from her work. Jackson couldn't help but chuckle despite the tension. Gallows humor was all they had to keep the fear at bay. That and the stubborn belief that they could pull this off. As the ship's systems hummed to life, Jackson felt a strange sensation, like static electricity prickling along his skin. It was as if the ship itself was waking up, ready to join the fight. Here goes nothing, Lyra said, her voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. They activated the artifact, the ship system snapping into alignment as if clicking into place. A wave of energy swept through them, a pulse of amplified emotions that flooded their minds, filling them with a sense of unity and purpose. Jackson felt it too, a surge of defiance and determination that banished the creeping despair. They were no longer just individuals fighting a losing battle, they were a force to be reckoned with. Let's give them hell, Rhys said, a fierce grin on her face. The crew focused, channeling their emotions through the artifact with a sense of shared purpose. It was a strange, exhilarating feeling, like standing on the edge of a precipice with the wind at their backs. The Zephyri's assault was relentless, but this time they were ready. The amplified emotions surged outwards, slamming into the Zephyri's telepathic barrier with the force of a freight train. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that fills a room just before the storm hits. And then, the backlash hit, the Zephyri's assault faltering under the onslaught of human emotions. Jackson felt the shift, the crack in the Zephyri's defenses as their overconfidence was turned against them. It was intoxicating, the heady rush of victory within their grasp. Keep it together. Jackson shouted, his voice almost lost in the cacophony of emotions. Push through. The crew responded, their combined will focused on exploiting the weakness in the Zephyri's defenses. It was a battle of wills, a clash of minds that would determine their fate. The pressure eased, the ship's system stabilizing as the crew's efforts turned the tide. They weren't just surviving, they were winning. As the Zephyri's attack faltered, the holo display flickered back to life, the priest's image reappearing. Its expression was one of disbelief, the smug certainty replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Impossible, it murmured, voice cracking with disbelief. Humans cannot. Guess what, buddy? Jackson interrupted, voice dripping with satisfaction. We just did. The crew erupted into cheers, a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done the impossible, turned the tables on a seemingly unbeatable foe. But even as they celebrated, Jackson knew it wasn't over. The Zephyri wouldn't give up easily, and they'd need to stay on their toes if they wanted to make this victory last. "All right, folks, let's not get too comfortable," Jackson said, a smile in his voice. "We may have won this round, but the game's not over yet." Ree nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. "We'll be ready. Whatever they throw at us next, we'll show them what we're made of." As the crew began to regroup, Jackson felt a sense of pride swelling within him. They'd faced the abyss and come out stronger, their defiance a beacon of hope in the darkness. Sure, they were still a ragtag bunch on a barely functioning ship, but they had something powerful, the knowledge that they could stand against the odds and come out on top. And if the universe wanted to keep throwing challenges their way, well, they'd just keep doing what they did best, facing them head-on with grit, determination, and a hefty dose of sarcasm. Because if there was one thing Jackson Cal knew for certain, it was that his crew wasn't just a group of survivors. They were fighters, and they weren't done fighting yet. The grinning bastard shuddered like an old man in a strip club, all noise and no performance. The crew stood at their stations, or what passed for stations when everything was held together with duct tape and crossed fingers. Jackson Cal, captain and ringmaster of this circus, rubbed his temples, fighting the persistent headache that came with living at the universe's punchline. Lyra was at the heart of things, like a caffeinated squirt on a keyboard. Her eyes darted over the console's flickering displays, fingers a blur as she synchronized the artifact with the ship systems. It was their ace in the hole, their last-ditch effort to turn the Zephyri's mind games against them. Telepathy amplification, courtesy of alien technology that looked like a child's art project gone wrong. "All right, folks," Jackson said, voice cutting through the chaos like a rusty blade. "This is it. We either make the Zephyri regret looking down their collective noses at us, or we get to find out what the afterlife looks like." Ree leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression one of practiced indifference. "If it's anything like this ship, I'm going to be thoroughly disappointed." "Hey, at least the drinks'll be free," Tenya chipped in, trying to keep the mood light even as tension crackled through the air like static. "Only because there's no bartender," Griggs added. His usual apathy was replaced by a sharp focus, the kind of laser attention you usually reserved for finding your phone charger in the dark. Lyra's voice broke through. "Ready when you are, Captain. Just say the word and we'll send those smug bastards running." Jackson nodded, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a particularly heavy and sarcastic parrot. "All right, team. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a bunch of pissed-off humans." The artifact pulsed with a soft, eerie glow, like a nightlight with a vendetta. The crew felt the change almost immediately, a tingling like pins and needles but for their brains. Emotions surged, amplified by the artifact, turning their collective anger, frustration, and defiance into a weapon. Lyra led the charge, her focus a razor's edge as she channeled the crew's emotions, turning them into a telepathic battering ram. The Zephyri, with their superior minds and fancy space magic, had never expected this. Humans weren't supposed to adapt, let alone fight back. "This is for every time they called us primitive apes," Lyra muttered, eyes narrowed. The Zephyri's telepathic assault, once a relentless tsunami, now felt more like a leaky tap. The crew's emotions surged forward, fueled by years of pent-up cynicism and sarcasm, crashing into the Zephyri's defenses with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Jackson watched the holo display, where the priest's smirk had been replaced by a rapidly deepening frown. "How's that superiority complex tasting now?" he called out, utterly thrilled by the unlikely turn of events. The Zephyri's telepathic nukes, once the stuff of nightmares, now fizzled out like soggy fireworks. The crew pushed harder, their amplified emotions battering the Zephyri's defenses with relentless determination. It was like watching a bunch of underdogs take down a giant with nothing but insults and spite. "Almost there," Lyra said, her voice strained but triumphant. The effort was clearly taking its toll, but she didn't waver. Ree shot a glance at Jackson, her wry smile belying the tension. "Didn't think we'd be saving the universe with bad attitudes, did you?" "I always knew cynicism was our secret weapon," Jackson replied, grinning despite himself. It was hard to believe they were actually pulling this off. The Zephyri's defenses cracked, their telepathic web unraveling under the onslaught of human emotion. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. Humans might be flawed, might be a mess, but they were a mess that fought back. Griggs let out a whoop of joy, his usual nonchalance swept away by the sheer exhilaration of the moment. "Take that, you mind-bending jerks!" The holo display flickered, the Zephyri priest's image popping back into view. Its expression was priceless, a mix of disbelief and something that might have been fear. "This cannot be," it stammered, voice laced with incredulity. "Surprise, surprise," Tenya said, leaning back with a cocky grin. "Turns out we're more than just pretty faces." The priest's eyes narrowed, but the bravado was gone. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Jackson shrugged with a casualness he didn't quite feel. "Bring it on. We'll be here, sarcastic and ready." The Zephyri retreated, their telepathic presence withdrawing like a tide going out. The crew watched them go with a mix of relief and residual adrenaline, the kind that left you buzzing long after the danger had passed. Jackson let out a long breath, feeling as if he'd just run a marathon while juggling flaming torches. Well, that was fun. "Let's not do it again anytime soon." "Yeah." Lyra slumped in her chair, the exhaustion catching up with her. "I'll second that. I'm too young to have this many gray hairs." The crew settled into a momentary silence, the post-battle calm a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. They'd done the impossible, faced down an enemy that should have wiped the floor with them and come out on top. "Okay, confession time," Jackson said, breaking the silence. "Who here actually thought we'd survive?" Ree raised an eyebrow. "Does it count if I only had a 50% belief rate?" Tenya laughed, the sound bright and infectious. "I was at about 20%, but I figured if we were going down, we'd do it with style." Griggs shrugged, his usual stoic facade slipping into a rare smile. "I wouldn't call what we have here style, but it worked, didn't it?" Lyra managed a weak wave. "I always believed in us." She paused. "Well, 90% of the time." Jackson looked around at his crew, his ragtag band of misfits and survivors. They were battered and bruised, but they were still here, defying the odds and making the universe take notice. "All right, crew," he said, pulling himself together. "Let's get this heap of bolts back online and figure out our next move. I have a feeling the Zephyri aren't going to let this slide." The grinning bastard groaned in agreement, a symphony of squeaks and groans that only a dysfunctional spaceship could produce. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was enough. As they worked to stabilize the ship and assess the damage, Jackson felt a sense of camaraderie and pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. They might not be the most polished crew or the best equipped, but they were a team, and they'd proven that together they could take on the universe. "Anyone else think we should celebrate?" Tenya suggested, wiping grease from her hands onto her jumpsuit. "I mean, we did just kick some serious telepathic butt. Celebrate with what?" Ree asked dryly. "We've got half a bottle of questionable whiskey and some expired protein bars. Better than nothing," Griggs said, heading for the supplies. Besides, we deserve a little something after that. The crew gathered around, passing the bottle and picking at the least offensive of the protein bars. It wasn't much, but it was a moment of normalcy in an otherwise insane situation. Jackson raised the bottle, the gleam in his eyes that of a man who'd just cheated death. To us, the worst crew in the sector and the best damn bunch of rebels I've ever had the pleasure to lead. The crew echoed the toast, laughter and banter filling the air. It was a small victory, but it was theirs and they'd earned it. As the celebrations wound down and the crew settled back into their roles, Jackson found himself alone on the bridge, staring out at the stars. They were still in the thick of it, still facing challenges that would make most sane people run for the hills, but they weren't done yet. The Zephyr would come back, and when they did, the grinning bastard and its crew would be ready. Armed with cynicism, sarcasm, and a newfound respect for their own resilience, they'd face whatever came next with defiance and determination. Because if the universe was going to keep making them the butt of the joke, Jackson and his crew were damn well going to make sure it was a good one. The grinning bastard creaked and groaned in the aftermath, like it was trying to clear its throat after a rough night of chain smoking and cheap whiskey. The crew busied themselves with patching up the battered old ship, the air filled with the sounds of clanking metal and muttered cursing. Jackson Cal stood on the bridge, surveying the scene with the kind of pride that only came from surviving something that should have killed you. He watched as his crew, his ragtag band of sarcastic misfits, went about their tasks with a grim determination that might have looked like efficiency if you squinted hard enough. "Well," Ree said, sidling up next to him with her usual air of practiced indifference, "that was a thing." Jackson snorted. "Yeah, just another day in the life of the universe's least favorite punching bags." She tilted her head, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "Think the Zephyr will come back for round 2? "Wouldn't surprise me," Jackson replied, rubbing the persistent headache that throbbed behind his eyes like a tiny drummer with a personal vendetta. "But next time we'll be ready." He glanced over at Lyra, who was hunched over the console, fingers still flying over the keys despite the exhaustion etched into her features. The artifact pulsed gently beside her, its glow less menacing now, more like a silent reminder of what they'd achieved. "You know," he said, raising his voice to carry across the bridge, "I think we might just owe that thing a drink." Lyra looked up, a tired smile breaking through her fatigue. "I think it prefers battery acid, but a toast wouldn't go amiss." Griggs rolled his eyes as he approached, brandishing a toolkit like it was a weapon. "We should be toasting to the fact that we're not all brain-dead vegetables right now. Speak for yourself," Tenya chimed in, hopping down from a ladder where she'd been fixing a particularly stubborn panel. "I'm pretty sure my brain's been a vegetable since this whole debacle started." "Carrot or broccoli?" Ree quipped, the sarcasm effortlessly sharp. Jackson chuckled, the sound rich with the kind of relief that only comes after narrowly avoiding a messy death. "All right, enough standing around. We've got a temple to secure." The word floated in the air, temple. Once the stuff of myth, now theirs for the taking. The irony wasn't lost on them, primitive apes hitching a ride on the universe's coattails and coming out on top. It was almost funny, except for the part where it wasn't. Jackson's mind drifted as the crew set their sights on the temple, the hulking alien structure looming in the distance. It had once been the site of their greatest challenge. Now it was their spoils of war, a war they weren't supposed to win. As they approached, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the temple's construction. It was all jagged edges and bizarre angles, as if someone had decided geometry was a suggestion rather than a rule. The Zephyr's idea of interior decoration seemed to include a healthy dose of Euclid. "Whoever built this place had some serious issues," Tenya commented, squinting at the structure with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Probably explains why they're so uptight," Griggs added, the toolkit clinking with each step he took. Inside, the temple was a maze of winding corridors and alien symbols that made Jackson's head hurt just looking at them. It was like someone had taken a look at human language and decided it wasn't nearly complicated enough. Feels like we're walking into a bad sci-fi novel, Ree said, trailing her fingers along the wall as they moved. The kind where everyone ends up dead or insane by the last chapter. Cheerful thought, Jackson replied, though he couldn't help but agree. The place had an unsettling vibe, like it was waiting for them to do something incredibly stupid. Lyra, ever the optimist, or as close to it as you could get in their line of work, was already studying the alien symbols with a kind of academic interest. Maybe we can use this to our advantage, she mused, her voice thoughtful. Always knew you were secretly a nerd, Tenya teased, earning a half-hearted glare from Lyra. Only when it suits me, Lyra shot back, though the smile on her face took the sting out of her words. Jackson let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. All right, team, let's figure out what all this means. If we're going to hold our ground here, we need to understand what we're dealing with. The crew set to work, poking and prodding at the temple's interior with a mixture of caution and curiosity. It wasn't long before they stumbled across a central chamber, dominated by a massive console that looked like it had been lifted from the set of an old sci-fi movie. Well, that's not ominous, Griggs said, eyeing the console warily. Only one way to find out what it does, Jackson replied, stepping forward with a recklessness that surprised even him. He reached out, fingers brushing against the alien controls. The console hummed to life, lights flickering on as if in greeting. The artifact, still cradled in Lyra's hands, responded in kind, its glow intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in an otherworldly light. Is it supposed to do that? Tenya asked, shielding her eyes against the glare. Probably not, Ree said, though there was no mistaking the hint of admiration in her voice. But since when do we do anything by the book? The temple's systems came online with a series of whirs and clicks, data streaming across the holo displays in a language none of them understood. It was like watching a million conversations happening all at once, layered atop one another in a cacophony of sound and light. Okay, that's kind of impressive, Griggs admitted, despite himself. Jackson nodded, the weight of the moment crashing over him like a wave. This was more than just a victory, it was an opportunity. They'd done the impossible, and now they had a foothold in a place that should have been beyond their reach. If we can figure out how to use this, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, we might just have a chance. A chance to do what? Ree asked, her skepticism ever present. To survive, Jackson replied, the words heavy with meaning. To fight back. To show the universe that we're more than just a bunch of backward apes. The crew fell silent, the enormity of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a thick fog. They'd taken a stand, faced down an enemy that should have obliterated them, and come out the other side. It was a testament to their resilience, their refusal to go quietly into that good night. All right, Jackson said, clapping his hands together in a show of forced enthusiasm, enough navel-gazing. We've got work to do. The crew sprang into action, each member finding their place in the organized chaos that was now their home. They had a temple to secure, systems to decipher, and a whole universe that needed reminding of just what humans were capable of. As Jackson watched them work, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They'd started as a group of individuals, each with their own reasons for joining the crew of the Grinning Bastard. But now, they were something more, a team, a family bound not by blood but by shared experiences and a stubborn refusal to give up. In the distance, the stars shone bright and indifferent, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the insignificance of their struggles. But that didn't matter, because here, in this alien temple, they'd carved out a piece of the cosmos for themselves, and they weren't about to let it go. Think we'll ever get used to this? Tenya asked, appearing at Jackson's side with a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and exhilaration. Probably not, Jackson replied, his own smile mirroring hers. But that's half the fun, isn't it? Maybe for you, she said, rolling her eyes with affection. I just want a decent night's sleep. Jackson chuckled, the sound echoing off the temple walls. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a promise. A promise that come what may, they'd face it together with the kind of humor and irreverence that had gotten them this far. As the crew settled into their new roles, Jackson allowed himself a moment to simply breathe. They'd survived. They'd won. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, a spark that burned bright against the bleakness of their reality. Because if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that humans were nothing if not adaptable. They'd made a home out of a malfunctioning ship, a sanctuary out of an alien temple, and a weapon out of their own emotions. And if the Zephyri, or anyone else for that matter, wanted to come at them again, they'd be ready. With a final glance at the stars, Jackson turned back to his crew, his family. They had a lot of work ahead of them, but that was okay, because they weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. And for a bunch of scrappy, sarcastic humans, that was the greatest victory of all.